He thought he had secured the perfect victory. Eric Scott sat back in his Italian leather chair, adjusting his $5,000 bespoke suit, and looked across the aisle at his soon-to-be ex-wife, Naomi. She was wearing a faded cardigan, looking small and defeated, just a waitress he had plucked from obscurity. He had hidden millions in shell companies. He was about to leave her with nothing but a used Honda and a broken heart. But Eric made one fatal calculation error. He didn't know who Naomi actually was. When the judge opened the sealed envelope, Eric's smirk didn't just fade, it disintegrated along with his entire empire. This is the story of the most satisfying courtroom revenge in history. The atmosphere inside courtroom 4B of the Cook County Circuit Court in Chicago was suffocatingly dry. It smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, a scent that Naomi Jenkins knew all too well. It was the scent of her life. She sat on the left side of the aisle, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her knuckles were white, the skin rough from years of scrubbing diner counters and carrying heavy trays of greasy food. She wore a simple grey skirt suit she had bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. It was slightly loose at the shoulders, making her look even smaller than she was. Across the aisle sat Eric Scott. He looked like a man who owned the room, the building, and perhaps the entire city block. His suit was a charcoal Armani, tailored to perfection to hide the slight paunch he'd developed over 5 years of expensive Scotch and steak dinners. He was whispering something to his lawyer, a shark named Bradford Coleman, and they both chuckled softly. It was that chuckle that made Naomi's stomach turn. It was the sound of dismissal. "All rise," the bailiff announced, his voice booming off the mahogany walls. Judge Harold Thompson entered. He was a stern man with thick spectacles and a reputation for wanting cases cleared quickly before his lunch break. He sat down, shuffled a stack of papers, and looked over his glasses at the two parties. "Docket number 4492, Scott versus Scott. We are here to finalize the financial settlement," Judge Thompson said, his voice flat. "I understand there is a contest regarding the division of assets." Bradford Coleman, Eric's lawyer, stood up. He didn't just stand, he unfolded himself with a practiced grace, shooting a pitying look at Naomi's attorney, a disheveled public defender named Mr. Abernathy, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Your Honor," Coleman began, his voice smooth as silk. "My client, Mr. Scott, has been incredibly generous. Despite the fact that Mrs. Scott brought 0 assets into the marriage and has contributed nothing to the household income during their 5-year union, we have offered a settlement." He paused for dramatic effect. "Mr. Scott is willing to provide a lump sum of $10,000, allowing her to keep the 2017 Honda Civic she currently drives, and he will graciously cover her legal fees. Given that she works as a waitress at a roadside diner and has no understanding of my client's complex business dealings, we feel this is more than equitable. It is charity." Eric smirked. He didn't try to hide it. He turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Naomi. His lips curled up in that arrogant, cruel smile she had learned to fear. "You are nothing," his eyes said. "You are the trash I took out." Naomi felt the heat rise in her cheeks. The court reporter typed furiously. Mr. Abernathy, Naomi's lawyer, cleared his throat nervously and stood up. He fumbled with his papers. "Your Honor, my client, Naomi. She believes there are undisclosed assets. Mr. Scott runs a multi-million-dollar logistics firm. A $10,000 settlement is... it's insulting." Judge Thompson sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mr. Abernathy, do you have proof of these undisclosed assets? The financial discovery provided by Mr. Scott's team seems comprehensive. Tax returns, bank statements. It shows his business took a significant downturn in the last 2 years. According to these documents, Mr. Scott is barely solvent." "That's a lie," Naomi whispered. "Speak up or remain silent, Mrs. Scott," the judge snapped. Eric leaned forward, feigning concern. "Your Honor, if I may? She's a simple woman. She doesn't understand how the economy works. She sees me wearing a suit and assumes I'm rich. The truth is, the market has been brutal. I'm drowning in debt. I'm trying to protect her from that debt by offering this settlement. I'm trying to be the good guy here." "The good guy," Naomi repeated, her voice trembling. "Yes, Naomi," Eric said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I took you out of that trailer park. I gave you a life. And now that things are tough, you're trying to bleed me dry? It's sad, really." The courtroom went silent. Eric's narrative was compelling. The successful businessman brought low by the market, trying to help his ungrateful waitress ex-wife. "Mr. Abernathy," the judge said, looking at the clock, "unless you have concrete evidence of fraud, I am inclined to approve the settlement as presented by Mr. Coleman. It seems fair given the documented financial state of the defendant." Bradford Coleman smirked at Eric. Eric winked back. They had won. They had moved $3 million into accounts in the Cayman Islands under a shell corporation named Red Rock LLC just 6 months ago. They had cooked the books to make Scott Logistics look like it was bleeding cash. It was the perfect crime, committed against a woman they believed was too uneducated to notice. "I have the decree here," the judge said, uncapping his pen. "I'm ready to sign." Naomi looked down at her hands. She remembered the day Eric had told her he wanted a divorce. He had come home smelling of expensive perfume, specifically Chanel No. 5, the scent worn by his executive assistant, Tiffany. He had thrown the papers on the kitchen table while she was chopping carrots for his dinner. "Sign it, Naomi," he had said. "Go back to waiting tables. It's all you're good for." The memory sharpened her resolve. She took a deep breath. The air in the courtroom suddenly felt different. "Wait," Naomi said. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a command. The judge paused, the pen hovering over the paper. "Mrs. Scott?" Naomi stood up. She didn't unfold gracefully like Coleman. She stood up with the rigid, unbreakable posture of a woman who had spent 10 hours a day on her feet, dealing with rude customers and heavy loads. She pushed her chair back. "Mr. Abernathy," Naomi said, looking at her lawyer. "Sit down." "Naomi, you can't," the lawyer stammered. "Sit down, Gregory," she said, gently but firmly. She turned her gaze to the judge. "Your Honor, before you sign that document, believing that Eric Scott is a man of charity, there is a piece of evidence that was not included in the discovery. Mostly because it doesn't belong to him. It belongs to me." Eric let out a short, barking laugh. "Evidence? What, did you find a receipt for a steak dinner in my pocket? Go home, Naomi. Order!" The judge banged his gavel. He looked at Naomi with renewed interest. There was a shift in her demeanor. The meek waitress was gone. In her place was someone cold, precise, and dangerously calm. "Mrs. Scott, you are representing yourself now?" "I am representing the truth, Your Honor," Naomi said. She reached into her worn-out tote bag. Eric watched, expecting her to pull out a crumpled tissue or a photo. Instead, she pulled out a thick blue folder sealed with red wax. Eric's brow furrowed. He had never seen that folder before. "Your Honor," Naomi said, her voice carrying to the back of the room. "Eric claims his company, Scott Logistics, is failing. He claims he has no assets. He claims I am just a waitress who knows nothing of business." She walked toward the bench. The bailiff stepped forward to stop her, but the judge waved him off. She placed the blue folder on the judge's desk. "But Eric forgot one thing," Naomi said, turning to face her husband. The look in her eyes made the blood drain from Eric's face. "He forgot to check who owns the holding company that just acquired the bank his loans are serviced through." Eric froze. His smirk twitched, then faltered. "What are you talking about?" Eric demanded, his voice rising an octave. "Open it, Your Honor," Naomi said. As the judge broke the seal, Naomi looked at Eric. "You see, Rick, you were right about one thing. I am a waitress. I serve people. But you never asked me why I was a waitress." To understand the terror that was currently gripping Eric Scott in that courtroom, we have to go back. We have to understand the 5 years of deception that led to this moment. 5 years ago, Naomi was 24. She was working the morning shift at Louis' Diner on 5th Street. It was a grease spoon joint, the kind of place where truckers and construction workers came for cheap eggs and bottomless coffee. Naomi was good at her job. She was efficient, quiet, and kept her head down. She wore her uniform, a pale pink dress with a white apron, like armor. To the world, she was just Naomi the waitress. Nobody asked about her last name. Nobody asked about her past. In a city like Chicago, people assume that if you're pouring coffee for minimum wage, you don't have a story worth hearing. Eric met her on a Tuesday. He had just closed a deal nearby, and his Mercedes had a flat tire. He came into Louis' to wait for AAA. He was loud, demanding, and flashed his money around. He saw Naomi and saw a challenge. She was beautiful in an understated way, hair pulled back in a messy bun, no makeup, striking green eyes that seemed to look right through him. But more than that, he saw someone he could mold. Eric was a narcissist who needed a prop, a pretty, submissive wife to hang on his arm at galas, someone who wouldn't ask questions about where the money came from or where he went at night. He courted her aggressively, flowers sent to the diner, big tips, smooth lies about wanting a simple life with a real woman. Naomi was hesitant. She was guarded. But eventually, she said yes to a date, then another. 6 months later, they were married. Or so Eric thought. For 5 years, the marriage followed a predictable, degrading pattern. Eric moved Naomi into his penthouse, but he never let her feel like it was her home. "Don't touch the thermostat, Naomi," he would scold. "You don't pay the bills. Don't wear that dress to the gala. You look like a farm girl. Wear the black one I bought you." He isolated her. He discouraged her from making friends with the other wives in his circle. "They're sharks, Naomi. You wouldn't understand their conversations. Just smile and nod." He insisted she keep working at the diner. This was the strangest part of his control. Usually, rich men want their wives to be ladies of leisure. But Eric loved the contrast. He loved telling his friends, "My wife is so humble, she still works the morning shift." It was a power trip. It reminded her every day that he was the provider and she was the worker. But the breaking point came 3 months before the court date. It was a rainy Tuesday. Eric wasn't supposed to be in town. He had told Naomi he was on a business trip to Tokyo for a merger with a Japanese tech firm. Naomi was at Louis', wiping down the counter. The bell above the door chimed. In walked Eric. He wasn't in Tokyo. He was in Chicago, and he wasn't alone. Clinging to his arm was Tiffany, his 22-year-old secretary. She was wearing a fur coat that cost more than Naomi made in a year. They were laughing, drunk on midday champagne. Eric didn't see Naomi at first. He led Tiffany to a booth in the back, Naomi's section. Naomi froze. Her co-worker, an older woman named Martha, grabbed her arm. "Honey, go to the back. I'll take them." "No," Naomi said. Her voice was surprisingly steady. "I'll take them." She walked over to the booth with her notepad. Eric was nuzzling Tiffany's neck. "Can I get you started with some drinks?" Naomi asked. Eric's head snapped up. His eyes went wide. For a second he looked terrified. Then the arrogance kicked in. He realized where he was. He was the king. She was the servant. He decided to brazen it out. "Oh, hi, Naomi," Eric said, his voice dripping with mock casualness. "Meeting got cancelled. Tiffany and I just stopped for a bite." Tiffany looked at Naomi, then at Eric and giggled. "This is her? The wife?" "Tiffany, be nice," Eric smirked. "Naomi, get us 2 coffees, and make sure the cups are clean this time." That was the moment. It wasn't the affair. Naomi had suspected that for a long time. It wasn't the lies. It was the sheer, unadulterated disrespect of bringing his mistress to her place of work and ordering her to serve them. Naomi didn't scream. She didn't throw the coffee pot. She simply looked at Eric for a long, silent 5 seconds. She looked at the man who thought he owned her. "Sure, Rick," she said, coming right up. She walked back to the kitchen. She didn't get the coffee. She took off her apron. She folded it neatly and placed it on the counter. She walked out the back door into the rain. She pulled a burner phone from the bottom of her purse, a phone Eric didn't know existed. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 7 years. The voice on the other end was raspy, old, and powerful. "Hello?" "Grandfather," Naomi said, the rain mingling with the tears on her face. "You were right about him. You were right about everything." There was a pause on the line. Then the voice softened, losing its hard edge. "Naomi, is it time to come home?" "Not yet," Naomi said, her eyes hardening as she looked back at the diner where her husband was laughing with another woman. "First, I have to take out the trash. I need the file on Scott Logistics. I need everything. And grandfather, activate the trust. Consider it done, my dear. Welcome back to the family." That was 3 months ago. Now, back in the courtroom, Judge Thompson was reading the contents of the blue folder. His eyes were getting wider with every page he turned. He looked from the documents to Eric, then to Naomi. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, electric. "Mr. Coleman," the judge said, his voice icy, "did you review your client's financial disclosures thoroughly?" "Of course, Your Honor," Coleman said, looking nervous for the first time. "We disclosed everything." "Really?" The judge held up a document. "Because this is a deed of transfer. It appears that Red Rock LLC in the Cayman Islands, the company claiming to hold your client's debt, is actually a subsidiary of Vander Hoven Global." Eric's face went grey. Vander Hoven Global. It was one of the largest private equity firms in the world. They ate companies like his for breakfast. And, the judge continued, looking at Naomi with a mixture of shock and respect, it appears that the majority shareholder of Vander Hoven Global is the plaintiff, Naomi Vander Hoven Scott. Eric stood up, his legs shaking. "Vander Hoven? No. No, that's impossible. She's a waitress. She's a nobody from a trailer park in Ohio." Naomi stepped forward. The cardigan didn't look like a symbol of poverty anymore. It looked like a costume she was bored of wearing. "I never lived in a trailer park, Eric," Naomi said, her voice clear and resonant. "I left my family because I wanted to see if I could make it on my own. I wanted to be loved for me, not my money. I met you, and I thought I found that." She took a step closer to him. He shrank back. "I worked as a waitress because I liked the honesty of it. Hard work, honest pay, something you know nothing about." You lied to me," Eric screamed, pointing a shaking finger at her. "This is fraud." "Fraud?" Naomi laughed. It was a dark, rich sound. You were hiding money to cheat me out of a settlement. I was hiding my identity to protect myself from parasites like you. And guess what, Rick? I bought your debt. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, since Red Rock LLC owns the debt of Scott Logistics, and since I am the sole proprietor of that entity, I am essentially my husband's biggest creditor. He doesn't just owe the bank money, he owes me. He owes me $11 million, Naomi said. Eric slumped into his chair. The smirk was gone. The predator had just realized he was locked in a cage with a T-Rex. But Naomi wasn't done. And, Your Honor, she added, I have one more witness I'd like to call. Someone who can testify to exactly where Mr. Scott's missing assets went. The courtroom doors opened. Eric turned around, expecting to see a forensic accountant. Instead, a woman walked in. She looked terrified. It was Tiffany. The silence in courtroom 4B was no longer dry. It was brittle, liable to snap at any moment. All eyes were fixed on the heavy oak doors as Tiffany Miller walked toward the witness stand. She looked nothing like the confident, laughing woman who had draped herself over Eric at the diner 3 months ago. Today, she looked fragile. She wore a conservative navy blue dress, high-necked and long-sleeved, a stark contrast to the flashy clothes Eric usually paraded her in. But it was her face that told the real story. Her eyes were red-rimmed, devoid of makeup, and her hands shook visibly as she placed them on the Bible to be sworn in. Eric stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. He blinked rapidly, trying to process the hallucination. This was his creature, his secret keeper. He paid her rent. He leased her BMW. She couldn't be here. Tiffany, Eric hissed, a desperate whisper that carried too far. What are you doing? Counsel, control your client, Judge Thompson warned, his voice low and dangerous. Bradford Coleman, Eric's lawyer, looked like he was trying to swallow a golf ball. He leaned over to Eric, whispering frantically, Did you know about this? Why is she here, Eric? What does she know? She knows nothing, Eric whispered back, sweat beading on his upper lip. She's just a secretary. She types emails. Naomi sat perfectly still. She didn't look at Eric. She watched Tiffany with a calm, steady gaze. There was no triumph in Naomi's eyes, only a solemn acknowledgement of a shared pain. Mr. Abernathy, emboldened by the sudden turn of events, approached the witness stand. State your name and occupation for the record, Abernathy said. Tiffany Miller, she said, her voice trembling. I am the executive assistant to the CEO at Scott Logistics. And the CEO is Eric Scott? Yes. Ms. Miller, Abernathy continued, pacing slowly. What is the nature of your relationship with Mr. Scott outside of the office? Tiffany looked at Eric. For a second, the old fear was there. Eric narrowed his eyes, a silent threat. I will destroy you. But then Tiffany's eyes drifted to Naomi. Naomi gave her a barely perceptible nod. Tiffany took a deep breath. We were having an affair for the last 2 years. Objection, Coleman shot up. Relevance. This is a financial settlement hearing, not a moral inquisition. Infidelity is not grounds for asset forfeiture in Illinois. It goes to credibility, Your Honor, Abernathy argued, and it goes to the allocation of marital assets. Overruled, the judge said, leaning forward. Continue. Abernathy walked back to his table and picked up a stack of printed emails, the ones Naomi had provided. Ms. Miller, during the course of your employment and your relationship, did Mr. Scott ever instruct you to handle financial transactions that were off the books? The room went dead silent. The air conditioner hummed loudly. Yes, Tiffany whispered. Can you speak up, please? Yes, she said, louder this time, her voice cracking. Starting about 18 months ago, Eric told me he was preparing for a transition. He said he needed to move liquidity out of the main operating accounts so that the company would look distressed. Eric slammed his hand on the table. Liar! She's a lying, hysterical woman. I broke up with her last week, and she's trying to get back at me. Mr. Scott, one more outburst, and I will hold you in contempt, Judge Thompson roared. Sit down. Eric sat, but his chest was heaving. He was trapped. He knew exactly what he had asked Tiffany to do, but he never thought she'd kept the records. He thought she was too stupid to understand what she was filing. Ms. Miller, Abernathy said gently. What exactly did he ask you to do? Tiffany reached into her purse and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. She held it up like it was a weapon. He asked me to set up 3 shell companies, she said, reciting the names from memory. Blue Horizon Imports in Nevada, Orion Consulting in Delaware, and Red Rock LLC in the Caymans. Eric's face drained of color. He told me to invoice Scott Logistics for consulting fees from these companies, Tiffany continued, tears finally spilling over. 50,000 here, 100,000 there. He said it was just tax optimization. He said everyone does it. But then, she paused, wiping her nose with a tissue. Then what, Ms. Miller? Then, last week, she sobbed. I found an email on his iPad. He left it unlocked at my apartment. It was an email to a realtor in Miami. He was buying a condo, a bachelor pad, and he was planning to move there alone. She looked directly at Eric now, her sorrow hardening into rage. He told me we were going to run away together after the divorce. He told me Naomi was the problem. He told me he loved me. But in that email, he referred to me as a loose end he needed to pay off. The courtroom gasped. Even the bailiff looked shocked. So, Tiffany said, her voice gaining strength. I called Naomi. Eric turned to look at his wife. Naomi was finally looking back at him. Her expression was unreadable, ancient and cold. I didn't believe her at first, Tiffany said to the judge, when she told me who she really was. But then she showed me the bank transfers. She showed me that she had been tracking the money the whole time. Eric thought he was hiding it, but Naomi, she has people. She knew every dime he moved. And the USB drive? Abernathy asked. It's the ledger, Tiffany said. The real ledger. Not the one he gave the IRS. This one shows the $4 million he siphoned out of the marital estate. Bradford Coleman sank into his chair, rubbing his forehead. He knew it was over. As a lawyer, he could fight allegations. He could fight hearsay. He could not fight a disgruntled mistress holding a digital ledger of felony embezzlement. Your Honor, Coleman said weakly, we request a recess. Denied, Judge Thompson said, his eyes hard behind his spectacles. We are long past recess, Mr. Coleman. We are now in the territory of perjury and fraud on the court. I want to hear what Mrs. Scott has to say. The focus of the room shifted entirely to the woman in the faded grey suit. Naomi stood up again. She didn't walk to the witness stand. She simply stood by her table, commanding the space. Eric was looking at her as if she were a stranger. And in a way, she was. He had married a projection, a mirror he used to admire himself. He had never actually seen her. Mrs. Scott, the judge said, his tone respectful. Or should I address you as Ms. van der Hoven? Naomi is fine, Your Honor, she said. Her voice was low, melodic, and lacked the shrillness of the courtroom drama. It was the voice of someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. Naomi, Eric croaked. Who are you? She turned to him. Do you remember our second date, Eric? We went to the Art Institute. We walked past the donor wall in the modern wing. Eric blinked, confused. What? You made a joke, Naomi continued. You pointed at the top name on the platinum tier, the Van der Hoven Foundation. You said, imagine having that kind of money. I bet the people who own that name are fat, lazy, and have never worked a day in their lives. Eric swallowed hard. He remembered. I didn't say anything, Naomi said. I just smiled and held your hand, because I wanted to believe you were just frustrated, not cruel. I wanted to believe that if you knew the truth, you wouldn't judge me for the accident of my birth. She walked slowly toward him. The bailiff watched her, but didn't intervene. My full name is Naomi Elizabeth van der Hoven. My grandfather is Cornelius van der Hoven, the founder of Van der Hoven Global. The bank you use, First City Trust, is a subsidiary of a holding company my family has owned since 1924. Eric felt like the floor was tilting. First City Trust. He had begged that bank for his initial business loan. He had groveled to the loan officers, and all this time he was sleeping next to the woman who essentially owned the building. Why? Eric whispered. Why the diner? Why the waitress act? It wasn't an act, Eric, she said sharply. It was a life. I wanted to know what it felt like to earn $1. I wanted to know what it felt like to be exhausted. I wanted to know people who were real. My family. We live in a bubble. A golden cage. I escaped. I found Louis' diner. I found friends there. I found dignity in serving coffee. She paused, looking down at her hands that were indeed rough. And then I met you. You were ambitious. You were hungry. I admired that. I thought, here is a man who is building something. I fell in love with you, Eric. I really did. I didn't tell you about the money because I wanted to be sure you loved me, not the Van der Hoven fortune. I did love you, Eric lied, desperation clawing at his throat. No, Naomi said simply. You loved having power over me. You loved picking me up from the diner in your Mercedes and feeling like a savior. You loved controlling the finances, giving me an allowance of $50 a week while you bought $5,000 suits. It made you feel big to keep me small. She walked back to the judge's bench and placed a hand on the blue folder. When you started cheating, I was hurt, Naomi said. But when you started stealing, when you started jeopardizing the future of the employees at your company just to hide money from me, that's when I stopped being your wife and started being a Van der Hoven. She opened the folder to a specific page. Your Honor, Naomi addressed the judge. This document is a purchase agreement, executed 3 days ago. The judge adjusted his glasses. Purchase of what? Of the outstanding debt obligations of Scott Logistics, Naomi said. Eric borrowed heavily to expand last year. $2 million. He put up the company assets as collateral. When he started defaulting, on purpose, to devalue the company for the divorce, the bank got nervous. She turned to Eric, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. Banks don't like risk, Eric, but private equity firms do. So I bought your debt. All of it. Every single loan, line of credit, and mortgage. Eric's lawyer, Coleman, had his head in his hands. He understood the legal implication immediately. Mr. Coleman, the judge said, does your client understand what this means? Coleman stood up, looking defeated. It means Mrs. Scott can call the loans. Immediately, Naomi added. There is a clause in your loan agreement, Eric, the change of control clause, or in this case, a material adverse change clause. Your fraud attempts, which are now part of the court record thanks to Ms. Miller, constitute a breach of contract. I am calling the note, Eric, Naomi said softly. $2 million, plus interest, payable immediately. "I don't have it!" Eric screamed. "You know I don't have it. It's in the Caymans. I can't access it without triggering an audit." "Then I am foreclosing," Naomi said. "On the business, on the warehouse, on the trucks, and—" She paused, looking at him with steel in her eyes. "On the penthouse. Since you used company funds to pay the mortgage, the penthouse is a company asset." Eric stared at her. His world was disintegrating. The penthouse was his pride. It was where he brought his mistresses. It was his castle. "You can't do that," he whispered. "I'm your husband." "I'm not doing it as your wife," Naomi replied. "I'm doing it as your creditor. And unlike you, the Van der Hovens always collect." The judge cleared his throat. He looked at Eric with zero sympathy. "Mr. Scott, it appears your settlement offer of $10,000 is insufficient. In light of the evidence presented by Ms. Miller and the financial documentation provided by Mrs. Scott, I am freezing all assets associated with you, Scott Logistics, and these shell companies effectively immediately." The judge turned to the bailiff. "And given the admission of embezzlement and tax fraud, I believe the district attorney's office needs to be notified. Please ask the deputy to step in." Eric looked at the door. 2 uniformed officers were already standing there. "But," Eric stammered, looking around the room for an exit that didn't exist. "Naomi, please, we can talk about this. I can change, I can make it right. Remember the honeymoon? Cabo." Naomi picked up her worn tote bag. She looked at him one last time. It was the look one gives to a stranger on the subway. Passing, indifferent, distant. "I remember Cabo, Eric," she said. "I paid for it. You just didn't know it at the time." She turned to her lawyer. "Mr. Abernathy, I think we're done here for today. I have a shift at Louis starting at 4. The audacity of it stunned the room. She had just revealed she was worth hundreds of millions. She had just destroyed her husband's empire, and she was going back to wait tables? You're going to work?" Eric asked, baffled. "It's Meatloaf Special Day," Naomi said, checking her cheap wristwatch. "Martha needs help with the dinner rush. And unlike you, Eric, I don't abandon my partners." She turned and began to walk down the aisle. The click of her sensible shoes on the floor was the only sound in the room. But before she reached the doors, the heavy wooden entrance swung open. A man stepped in. He wasn't a bailiff. He wasn't a lawyer. He was an older man, dressed in a 3-piece suit that cost more than Eric's car. He leaned on a silver-tipped cane. Behind him stood 2 men who looked like Secret Service agents. It was Cornelius van der Hoven, the patriarch. He looked at Naomi, then looked past her at Eric. The look was one of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Grandfather," Naomi said, stopping. "I told you I handled it." "I know, my dear," the old man rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "I just wanted to see the man who thought a Van der Hoven wasn't good enough for him." The air in the courtroom had shifted from the stale dryness of bureaucracy to something charged and heavy, like the atmosphere before a tornado touches down. Cornelius van der Hoven did not just walk into a room. He occupied it. He tapped his silver-tipped cane on the linoleum floor, a rhythmic clack, clack, clack that silenced the whispers of the clerks and the rustling of papers. He was 80 years old, but he stood with the upright bearing of a retired general. His suit was a midnight blue 3-piece, cut from cloth that likely cost more than Eric's entire wardrobe. But it was his eyes, piercing, steel grey, identical to Naomi's, that held the true power. Eric Scott, who had spent his career bullying smaller vendors and intimidating employees, shrank back into his chair. He looked like a child caught playing with matches while the house burned down. "Mr. van der Hoven," Judge Thompson said, nodding respectfully. Even the judge seemed to sit up straighter. The van der Hoven family was not just wealthy. They were a foundational pillar of the city's history. They built the libraries, the hospitals, the museums. "Your Honor," Cornelius replied, his voice a deep baritone that rumbled in his chest. He didn't look at the judge, though. His gaze was fixed on Eric. He walked slowly to the defense table. The two men behind him, private security, broad-shouldered and silent, stopped at the rail. Cornelius didn't need them. "So," Cornelius said, stopping 2 feet from Eric, "this is the man." Eric tried to stand, perhaps out of instinct or a desperate attempt to regain some dignity, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. He remained seated, looking up at the old man. "Sir, Eric stammered. "I didn't know. Naomi never told me." "She didn't tell you because she wanted to know if you were a man of character," Cornelius said. He didn't shout. He spoke with a quiet, devastating precision. "She wanted to know if you could love a woman who had nothing to offer but her heart and her hands. And you failed that test, Mr. Scott. You failed it spectacularly." Cornelius looked around the courtroom, his eyes landing on Tiffany, who was still weeping softly on the witness stand, and then back to Eric. "You treated my granddaughter like a servant," Cornelius continued. "You made her beg for scraps. You made her feel small so you could feel big. Do you have any idea how rare she is? Do you know what kind of woman works a double shift on her feet when she could be sitting on a yacht in the Mediterranean?" I loved her in my own way," Eric whispered, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "You loved owning her," Cornelius corrected, "but you never owned her. You were merely borrowing her time, and the lease is up." Cornelius turned his back on Eric, dismissing him as if he were a minor annoyance, a stain on a rug. He looked at Naomi. The hardness in his face melted instantly. "Are you ready, my dear?" he asked gently. Naomi nodded. She looked tired. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, leaving behind the exhaustion of 5 years of pretense. "Yes, grandfather, but I have to go to work." Cornelius smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Of course, the meatloaf special. I wouldn't dream of making you late. Martha would have my head." Before Naomi could leave, the 2 police officers who had been waiting by the door stepped forward. The heavier one, Officer Miller, approached Eric. "Eric Scott?" the officer asked. Eric looked up, dazed. "Yes?" "Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." "What? Why?" Eric looked at his lawyer, but Bradford Coleman was busy packing his briefcase, deliberately avoiding eye contact. Coleman knew a sinking ship when he saw one, and he had no intention of drowning with the captain. "You are under arrest for embezzlement, tax fraud, and grand larceny," the officer recited, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Ms. Miller's testimony and the evidence provided have given us probable cause." "You can't do this here," Eric protested, his voice rising to a shriek as the cold metal clicked around his wrists. "I'm a businessman. I have a reputation." "You have the right to remain silent," the officer droned, spinning Eric around. As they marched him out, Eric twisted his head back, desperate for someone to save him. He looked at Tiffany, but she looked away. He looked at his lawyer, who was checking his watch. Finally, he looked at Naomi. "Naomi!" he screamed, the veneer of the sophisticated CEO completely gone. "Naomi, help me! Don't let them take me! I'm your husband! Naomi!" Naomi paused at the courtroom doors. She didn't turn around. She simply adjusted the strap of her tote bag, looked at her grandfather, and walked out into the hallway. The heavy doors swung shut, cutting off Eric's screams. 3 hours later, the rain had stopped, leaving the Chicago streets slick and reflecting the neon lights of the city. Naomi was not at the diner. Martha, upon seeing the news crews gathering outside the courthouse on the television, had texted her, "Honey, take the night off. You've got bigger fish to fry, and bring me that man's scalp when you're done." Instead, Naomi stood in the elevator of the Millennium Tower, watching the numbers climb. 40, 41, 42. She had ridden this elevator thousands of times. Usually she was carrying grocery bags, terrified she had bought the wrong brand of organic kale. Usually her heart was racing with anxiety, wondering what mood Eric would be in. Today, her heart was slow and steady. The elevator chimed at the penthouse level. The doors slid open to reveal the foyer. It was a space designed to impress, not to comfort. Cold marble floors, sharp, angular furniture, abstract art that Eric claimed to love but didn't understand. It smelled of lemon polish and the lingering, expensive scent of Eric's cologne. It smelled like a prison. Naomi stepped inside. She wasn't alone. Behind her were two men from the bank, First City Trust, and a locksmith. Ms. van der Hoven, the lead banker, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, said, "Technically, the foreclosure process takes time, but given the seizure order from the judge and your unique position as the debt holder, we can secure the property immediately." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," Naomi said softly. "I just need a moment. Take all the time you need. We'll wait in the hall." Naomi walked into the living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, the lights twinkling like diamonds. Eric loved this view. He used to stand here with a glass of scotch, surveying the city like a lord surveying his fiefdom. Naomi walked to the wet bar. There was a coaster with a ring of moisture on it. Eric must have had a drink right before leaving for court. He had been so sure he was coming back to celebrate. She picked up the glass and dropped it into the trash can. Clunk. She walked down the hallway to the master bedroom. This was the room she hated the most. The bed was enormous, covered in silky grey sheets that were cold to the touch. On the nightstand, Eric's watch collection was displayed in a glass case. Rolex, Patek Philippe, Omega. She opened the closet. His suits were lined up by colour, dozens of them. The smell of him was stronger here. It made her stomach churn. In the corner of the closet, shoved to the back, was a small cardboard box. Naomi pulled it out. It was her corner. Eric hadn't allowed her much space. This box contained the things he deemed too trashy for the bedroom display. She opened it. Inside was a framed photo of her parents, a simple picture taken at a picnic before they died in a plane crash when she was 10. There was a dried flower from her first date with Eric, back when he was pretending to be nice. And there was her name tag from Louie's Diner. Sarah Service, with a smile. She ran her thumb over the plastic tag. This was real. The suits, the watches, the view. That was all a costume. "Miss van der Hoven." Naomi turned. A woman was standing in the doorway. It wasn't the banker. It was Tiffany. Tiffany hadn't changed out of her court clothes. She looked exhausted, her face blotchy from crying. She held a box of personal items. "The doorman let me up," Tiffany said, her voice shaking. I just came to get my things. I left some clothes here. I didn't know you would be here." Naomi stood up, holding the name tag. She looked at the woman who had helped destroy her marriage, and who had also helped save her from it. "I'm sorry," Tiffany whispered, tears welling up again. "I know that doesn't mean anything. I was jealous of you, you know. He talked about you like you were nothing, but he always went home to you. I wanted to be the one he went home to. I was so stupid." Naomi looked at Tiffany. She saw a girl who had been dazzled by the same fake light that had blinded her 5 years ago. Eric was a master at finding vulnerable women and exploiting them. "He used us both, Tiffany," Naomi said quietly. "He played on my desire to be loved for myself, and he played on your desire to be taken care of. We were just actors in his play." Tiffany wiped her eyes. "What are you going to do? With all of this?" She gestured to the opulent apartment. Naomi looked around. The cold marble, the expensive leather, the silent, echoing rooms. "Burn it," Naomi said. Tiffany's eyes went wide. "What?" "Not literally," Naomi clarified, a small, grim smile appearing. "I'm selling it. Everything. The furniture, the art, the watches, the clothes, all of it." "But this place is worth millions." "I don't want the money," Naomi said. "I'm going to liquidate everything Eric owned, every asset I seized today, and I'm going to start a fund." "A fund?" "For women," Naomi said, her voice gaining strength. "Women who are trapped, women who are financially controlled by their partners, women who can't leave because they don't have a bank account or a safe place to go. I'm going to use Eric's empire to make sure no man can ever do this to another woman again." Tiffany stared at her. "You'd do that? After everything?" "It's the only way to make the last 5 years mean something," Naomi said. She walked over to the closet and pulled out one of Eric's $5,000 Italian suits. She threw it onto the floor. "Grab a bag, Tiffany," Naomi commanded, her voice sounding like a Vanderhoven again. "Help me pack this up. We're donating the clothes to a job placement charity for ex-convicts. I think Eric would appreciate the irony." Tiffany let out a short, wet laugh. "Okay. Yeah, I can do that." For the next hour, the two women, the wife and the mistress, worked in silence, stripping the penthouse of its arrogance. They pulled suits off hangers, swept watches into bags, and cleared the shelves of the pretentious awards Eric had bought for himself. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the empty living room, Naomi walked to the window one last time. She looked down at the street, 60 stories below. Somewhere down there, in a holding cell, Eric was realizing that his life was over. But Naomi's life, her real life, was just beginning. She turned to leave, her cardboard box tucked under her arm. "Naomi?" Tiffany asked from the doorway. "Yes." "Thank you. For not destroying me too." "You could have." Naomi paused. "You told the truth, Tiffany. In the end, that's all that matters." Naomi walked out of the penthouse, leaving the door open for the bankers to lock up the hollow shell of Eric Scott's ego. She stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the elevator descended, Naomi reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number. "Martha." "Naomi, I told you to take the night off." "I know," Naomi said, leaning her head against the cool metal wall. "But I'm coming in. I need to wash some dishes. I need to feel the hot water and the soap. I need to be Naomi again." "All right, honey." Martha's warm voice crackled through the phone. "Coffee's on, and I saved you a slice of cherry pie." 1 year later, the lunchtime rush at Louie's diner was in full swing. The smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee filled the air, a scent that Naomi found more comforting than any perfume in the world. Naomi moved through the tables with practiced ease, balancing 3 plates on one arm. She wore the same pink uniform, the same white apron. To the regulars, nothing had changed. She was still Naomi, the best waitress on 5th Street. But to the rest of the world, everything had changed. On the small television, mounted in the corner of the diner, a news report was playing. The headline read, "The Scott Initiative, How One Woman's Divorce Settlement is Saving Thousands." The anchor's voice drifted over the clatter of silverware. "It has been 6 months since the conviction of Eric Scott, the disgraced CEO of Scott Logistics, who was sentenced to 8 years in Statesville Correctional Center for massive fraud and embezzlement. But from the ashes of his corrupt empire, his ex-wife, Naomi van der Hoven, has built a sanctuary. At table 4, a young woman looked up from her pancakes. She had a black eye, concealed poorly with makeup, and a bruised wrist. She was reading a pamphlet Naomi had slipped under her coffee cup, along with the check. The pamphlet bore the logo of a phoenix rising from a flame. It was the Scott Initiative. It offered free legal counsel, emergency housing, and financial aid for women trapped in financial abuse. The young woman looked at Naomi, tears welling in her eyes. "Is this real?" she whispered. "Can they really help me?" Naomi stopped pouring coffee. She looked at the girl, really looked at her, with eyes that had seen the same darkness. "It's real," Naomi said softly. "Call the number. Tell them Naomi sent you. They'll have a car here in 10 minutes. The girl nodded, clutching the paper like a lifeline. Just then, the diner door opened. A man walked in. He was wearing a delivery uniform, carrying a clipboard. It was a new driver for the produce company. "Delivery for the owner," the driver called out, looking around for a manager in a suit. "I'll take it," Naomi said, wiping her hands on her apron. The driver looked her up and down, sneering slightly at her grease-stained uniform. "I need the owner, sweetheart, not the help. This invoice is big." The diner went quiet. Martha, who was behind the counter, stopped scrubbing. The regulars lowered their newspapers. They all knew. Naomi didn't get angry. She didn't shout. She just smiled, a smile that was sharp, knowing, and dangerous. It was the smile of a woman who had taken down a titan and didn't need to prove anything to a delivery driver. "I am the owner," Naomi said, her voice calm, but projecting to every corner of the room. "I bought the building 6 months ago. I bought the supplier you work for last week. So, you can hand me the clipboard, or you can drive your truck back to the warehouse and explain to your boss why you insulted the CEO." The driver's face went pale. He handed her the clipboard with a trembling hand. "Sorry, ma'am," he stammered. You're wearing—" "I wear what I want," Naomi signed the invoice with a flourish. "Because I earned it." As the driver scurried out, Martha cranked up the volume on the TV. The news was showing a clip of Eric being led into a transport van, looking old, grey and broken. He had lost his smirk. Naomi glanced at the screen for a fleeting second, then turned back to the young woman at table 4. "More coffee, hun?" Naomi asked. "Please," the woman smiled, looking hopeful for the first time. Naomi poured the coffee. She wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just a van der Hoven. She was free. And that was the richest status of all. That is the story of Naomi and Eric. It's a brutal reminder that arrogance is a house of cards. Eric thought his value came from his suit, his car, and his ability to control someone he deemed lesser. He smirked because he thought he held all the cards, never realizing he was playing against the dealer. Naomi proved that true power isn't about what you show off. It's about what you can endure, and ultimately, what you can build. She turned her trauma into a shield for others, while Eric was left with nothing but his memories of a life he didn't deserve. What would you have done if you were in Naomi's shoes? Would you have taken the money and run? Or would you have stayed to serve justice exactly like she did? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of karma and revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Share this video with a friend who needs to be reminded that sometimes the quietest people have the loudest roar. Thanks for watching.